I was checking my cattle when I saw them. 3 police cruisers kicking up dust on my gravel driveway. Armed officers surrounding a 45-year-old rancher like I was some kind of threat. My hand instinctively moved toward my shotgun. For generations of Millers had defended this land, and I wasn't about to be the first to surrender it. What these city folks with badges didn't know yet, they just picked a fight with the wrong countryman. The morning sun was just breaking over the eastern pasture when I first noticed those dust clouds. Even from a distance, some things you never miss, like trouble coming your way. My name's Jim Miller. Served in Iraq during Operation Desert Storm before coming home to take over the family ranch. My great-grandfather staked this claim in 1903, 120 acres of the finest grazing land in the county. Been Miller land ever since. 3 years ago, I buried Martha, my wife of 15 years. Cancer took her fast. We were still at the cemetery when I got that first certified letter. Some development company wanted to discuss opportunities regarding my property. Couldn't even wait until I'd put my wife in the ground. 6 months later, the bulldozers arrived. From my kitchen window, I watched them tear into the Johnson property next door. Old Man Johnson's kids sold out the minute he passed. Within a year, Whispering Pines Estates was up and running, million-dollar homes with manicured lawns where cattle used to graze. Then came the HOA, Homeowners Association. Got an invitation to their first meeting. Thought I'd be neighborly, see what these folks were about. Big mistake. The moment I walked in, felt like walking into enemy territory. Their president, Richard Harrington, former city councilman with slick hair and slicker talk, couldn't hide his disdain when he introduced me as our agricultural neighbor. That night, they discussed community standards and aesthetic guidelines. But I caught the sidelong glances when they mentioned rural eyesores and necessary community improvements. They weren't just building houses, they were planning to remake the entire area. When Harrington brought up concerns about agricultural smells affecting property values, I stood up, reminded them that my ranch predated their development by over a century, cited the grandfather clause laws protecting established agricultural operations. The look on Harrington's face, like he'd bitten into something sour. First small victory. But as I drove home that night, I knew this was just the beginning of a war for my land. 2 days after that meeting, I drove to the county records office. Martha always said knowledge is power, and she'd worked as a legal secretary before we had kids. Taught me to do my homework. Sandra, the records clerk, had been Martha's bridge partner for 20 years. When I told her about the HOA meeting, her expression changed. "Jim, you need to see something?" she whispered, glancing around the empty office. She pulled a large folder marked Whispering Pines Phase 2. Inside were detailed plans not just for more houses, but for a championship golf course. A golf course that, according to the drawings, stretched right across the eastern third of my property. Property I hadn't sold and had no intention of selling. "These were filed 3 months ago," Sandra said. "They've already had preliminary approval meetings with the zoning commission." "How is that possible?" I asked. "They don't own my land." She looked at me with sad eyes. "The application lists your property as pending acquisition." That night I couldn't sleep. Kept thinking about Martha, how she'd fought for everything important to her. Decided to do some digging of my own. Online research revealed Harrington wasn't just the HOA president. He was a senior advisor for Meridian Development Group, the company building Whispering Pines. And Meridian's CEO had contributed heavily to every county commissioner's election campaign. Next morning, I attended the county commission's public meeting. When they opened the floor for comments, I stood up. "I understand there are plans to build a golf course on land that includes my property," I said clearly. "I'm here to inform the commission that my land is not for sale, has never been for sale, and will never be for sale." The commissioners looked uncomfortable. Harrington, sitting in the front row, turned scarlet. Driving home that evening, I noticed a black SUV following me, staying just far enough back to deny any intention. Message received. They weren't giving up. A week later, during a particularly dry spell, I was checking my irrigation system when I made another discovery. The drought had made water rights increasingly valuable in our area. My property included senior water rights to Carson Creek, rights that would be essential for maintaining a golf course in this climate. That's when it clicked. This wasn't just about aesthetics or property values. They needed my water rights more than they needed my land. The next day, a county environmental officer showed up unannounced, claimed there had been anonymous complaints about water contamination from my cattle operation. Found nothing, of course, but the message was clear: the pressure campaign had begun. That evening, I called my old friend Derek, who'd lost his farm one county over last year. His story sounded eerily familiar: HOA complaints, mysterious inspections, escalating pressure until he finally sold at half the market value. "They'll wear you down, Jim," he warned. "They've got time and money. They figure you don't have either." But Derek didn't know me very well. In Vietnam, I'd learned that patience and preparation win more battles than brute force. They might have money, but I had something they didn't: 63 years of pure stubborn determination. The real trouble started a month later. Found 3 of my cattle sick near the north fence line. Vet confirmed they'd ingested something toxic, something that didn't grow naturally on my land. That same afternoon, I drove to the hardware store and bought security cameras. Military instincts die hard: secure the perimeter, document everything. 2 days later, I received a notice of environmental violations from the county, claims that my cattle were contaminating the groundwater. The inspection report was signed by an official I'd never met, dated on a day when no one had visited my property. Then came the phone calls, always after 10 p.m. "Accidents happen to stubborn old men," one caller said before hanging up. I started recording everything. The HOA began sending weekly violation notices, claiming my fences violated their aesthetic guidelines, that my tractor storage constituted an eyesore, that the occasional mooing of my cattle constituted a noise violation. Each notice carried increasingly absurd fines. My mailbox was vandalized 3 times. Sections of fence mysteriously damaged overnight. Feed supplies I'd ordered were canceled without my knowledge. Then came the most disturbing incident. Woke up one morning to find someone had cut the lock on my barn and left the door wide open. Nothing was stolen, but the message was clear: "We can get to you anytime." The first security camera footage caught 3 men in dark clothing tampering with my water pump around 2 a.m. Couldn't see their faces clearly, but one had the same distinctive walk as Harrington. I wasn't just documenting these incidents, I was building a case. Martha's old law firm had given me advice on what evidence would be admissible. I maintained a detailed log of every incident, every call, every notice, with timestamps and photographs. One morning, I found an unmarked envelope in my mailbox containing detailed information about agricultural protection laws in our state and contact information for the Rural Legal Defense Network. No name, no return address, just the information I needed. Seems I wasn't the only one who had issues with Harrington and his crew. The calls became more frequent. "The county can declare eminent domain, you know," one caller threatened. "They'll take it for 1/10 of what we're offering." What they didn't know is that I'd already begun the process of placing my property under a conservation easement, a legal designation that would permanently protect it from development. The paperwork was nearly complete. Then came the financial pressure. My property taxes were suddenly reassessed at triple their previous value. The bank called about irregularities with my mortgage, a mortgage I'd paid off 15 years earlier. Throughout all this, I maintained my routine. Fed my cattle at dawn, maintained my fences, kept my land in immaculate condition. Sometimes the best resistance is simply refusing to break. After a particularly threatening call one night, I cleaned the shotgun my father had passed down to me and kept it in my truck. Not loaded, I'm not foolish, but visible. A reminder of an older way of settling disputes about land and honor. A reminder I wasn't defenseless. Little did I know how soon I'd need that reminder. As the pressure mounted, I realized I couldn't fight this battle alone. Started reaching out to other farmers and ranchers in the area. Found I wasn't the only one feeling the squeeze. Peterson, 5 miles down the road, had been fighting rezoning attempts for years. The Garcias were dealing with suspicious equipment failures during harvest season. Widow Jenkins, who'd been running her farm alone since her husband passed, had her irrigation access mysteriously cut off twice. We met at my kitchen table, 6 of us at first, then 12, then 20. Some faces I knew from church or the feed store, others I'd only nodded to at the county fair. Now we were allies. Tom Richards, a paralegal himself who'd grown up on his family's farm, brought legal documents showing a pattern of suspicious property acquisitions throughout the county, all tracing back to shell companies connected to Meridian Development. "They're building something bigger than a golf course," Richards said. "County records show plans for a resort, conference center, the works. But they need water rights, and most of those belong to families like ours." Sarah Jenkins, who worked at the County Water Authority office, confirmed it. "They've applied for water permits that would drain the aquifer dry in 10 years. We formed the County Agricultural Protection Alliance, started attending every county meeting, filed formal protests against zoning changes, documented everything. Meanwhile, I connected with Jack Simmons, a retired attorney who'd specialized in land rights. His father and mine had served together in Korea. Said he'd help pro bono. "They're counting on you being isolated and uninformed," Simmons told me. "Their entire strategy falls apart once you organize and know your rights." With his guidance, I filed the paperwork for an agricultural conservation easement, a legal designation that would permanently protect my land from development, regardless of who owned it in the future. I also reached out to my old high school teammate Bill Henderson, now the county sheriff. Couldn't involve him officially, but over coffee at the diner, he warned me. "Jim, word is they're getting desperate. Harrington's got connections with some ex-cops working private security. Be careful." That evening, I gathered my alliance members again. We developed a system, trail cameras on all our properties, regular check-ins, a phone tree for emergencies. "They want us scared and isolated," I told the group. "But that's not who we are. That's not what this land raised us to be." As they left, Sarah Jenkins squeezed my hand. "Jim, Martha would be proud of you standing your ground." I just nodded, emotion catching in my throat. This wasn't just about land anymore. It was about everything that land represented: heritage, community, a way of life worth preserving. The day of reckoning came on a Tuesday in October. Perfect autumn morning, cool air, clear sky. I was repairing the fence line visible from the main road, deliberately in plain sight. When I heard vehicles approaching, I didn't look up right away. Let them make the first move. 3 police cruisers pulled up, positioning themselves in a semicircle around my truck. Tactical formation, something I recognized from my military days. 6 officers emerged. Something immediately felt off. Their uniforms were county sheriff designs, but the vehicles had city markings. In our jurisdiction, that made no sense. The lead officer approached while the others spread out. "Mr. Miller?" he called out, hand resting near his holster. I straightened up slowly, keeping my fence tool visible. "That's me. We've received multiple complaints about this property. Environmental violations, animal welfare concerns, illegal structures." He was reading from a clipboard but not making eye contact. Another red flag. "That's so," I said calmly. "Don't recall any inspectors coming by. Mind showing me a warrant?" His jaw tightened. "We have authorization to conduct an inspection based on probable cause." I slowly walked to my truck, telegraphing my movements. "Well, officer, this is private property. Has been since before your grandfather was born. I'll need to see proper documentation." That's when I reached into my truck cab and took out my shotgun. Didn't point it at anyone, just held it naturally, barrel pointed at the ground. Not threatening, but sending a message. The atmosphere shifted instantly. 2 officers put hands on their weapons. "Sir, I'm going to have to ask you to put down the firearm," the lead officer said, voice tightening. "I'm on my own property, officer. This state has clear laws about that." I kept my tone conversational, even friendly. "Now, about that warrant." He stepped forward. "Mr. Miller, we've received reports of animal neglect, contamination of water sources, and illegal structures. We can do this the easy way or—" That's when I noticed his name tag, Harrington. Same last name as the HOA president. Too much of a coincidence. You related to Richard Harrington by any chance? I asked. A flicker of surprise crossed his face. That's not relevant to, because I find it mighty interesting that I'm suddenly getting visits from officers I've never seen before, making claims about violations nobody's documented. Right when his development company is trying to pressure me to sell. The other officers exchanged glances. One, younger than the rest, looked distinctly uncomfortable. This is official county business, the lead officer insisted, though his confidence was wavering. Is it? I gestured to their vehicles. Because those are city police cars. We're 15 miles outside city jurisdiction. The younger officer took a step back. And that inspection order you're holding, may I see it? I kept my voice steady, my shotgun still pointed at the ground. After a moment's hesitation, he held out the clipboard. I didn't reach for it. Read the letterhead, please. He glanced down, then back up, saying nothing. It's not county stationery, is it? Looks to me like HOA letterhead designed to look official. That's impersonating county officials. Serious offense in this state. That's when I heard the sound of engines approaching. More vehicles, but not the reinforcements they were expecting. I think we're done here, I said calmly. Unless you do have an actual warrant? The lead officer's face hardened. Mr. Miller, you're interfering with... With what, exactly? I interrupted, because from where I stand, this looks an awful lot like trespassing. And possibly impersonating law enforcement. I nodded toward the security cameras visible on my barn. Those have been recording since you arrived. Along with the ones you can't see. The younger officer muttered something to his colleague. The tension was palpable. You think you're clever, the lead officer said, dropping the official pretense. But you're just delaying the inevitable. This land will be developed. People like you are in the way of progress. I smiled slightly. My family's been on this land for 120 years. My father and grandfather stood their ground before me. We've seen all kinds of progress come and go. That's when I noticed movement from the road. My neighbor's truck was pulling up, the elderly Mrs. Davis clearly visible in the passenger seat with her smartphone held high, live streaming everything. Behind her came another vehicle, Judge Thompson's distinctive vintage Cadillac. The lead officer saw them too. His hand moved away from his weapon. Seems we have company, I said. Hope you don't mind an audience. Mrs. Davis, in her 70s and barely 5 feet tall, stepped out of her son's truck with remarkable speed. Her phone remained steadily pointed at the confrontation. Jim, you all right? She called out. I'm streaming this to the community Facebook group. Got about 200 people watching right now. The officers shifted uncomfortably. Judge Thompson emerged from his Cadillac with the deliberate movements of his experience. Though only in his 60s, the retired judge still carried the authoritative presence from his decades on the bench. Interesting situation we have here, he remarked, approaching slowly. I wasn't aware the city police had jurisdiction on county land. His tone made it clear this wasn't a casual observation. The younger officer whispered something to the lead officer, who looked increasingly uncomfortable. We're responding to complaints, the lead officer insisted, though his voice had lost its edge. Complaints, Judge Thompson repeated. Through proper channels, I assume? With county documentation? Following jurisdictional protocols. Before the officer could respond, another vehicle approached, a gleaming black SUV that pulled up abruptly. Richard Harrington himself stepped out, his face flushed with anger. What's the delay here? He demanded, then froze when he saw the gathered crowd. I couldn't have planned it better. Mr. Harrington, I called out pleasantly. Perfect timing. These officers were just about to explain how they came to be conducting an unauthorized inspection with documentation on your HOA letterhead. The lead officer, who I now strongly suspected was Harrington's son-in-law, looked like he wanted to disappear. This is a simple compliance check, Harrington blustered. The county has every right. But these aren't county officers, Mrs. Davis interrupted, her phone still recording. And my son works for the county. Says there's no inspection scheduled for Jim's property. I turned to the youngest officer, who was clearly having second thoughts about the whole operation. Officer, I notice you're wearing a body camera. Department policy, I assume. He nodded reluctantly. Good, I said. That means there's an official record of everything happening here, including any orders you received for this operation. That was when my phone rang. I answered, putting it on speaker. Mr. Miller? This is David Schaefer from Carson and Schaefer Law. We've prepared the emergency injunction as you requested and filed it with the county court. Judge Ramirez has signed off on it. No one can demand access to your property without a proper warrant. The timing couldn't have been better had I planned it, which, in fact, I had. Martha's old law firm had been on standby since I spotted the suspicious vehicles approaching on my security camera feed. I turned to face Harrington directly. Now seems like a good time to mention that I've documented every interaction with your HOA over the past 2 years. Every letter, every phone call, every coincidental visit. I gestured toward the barn, including security footage of someone who looks remarkably like you tampering with my fence line last month. Harrington's face drained of color. Judge Thompson cleared his throat. As a former officer of the court, I feel obligated to point out that misrepresenting police authority is a felony offense in this state. The lead officer finally seemed to realize the gravity of his situation. He signaled to the others to return to their vehicles. This isn't over, Miller, Harrington said through clenched teeth. I smiled slightly. Actually, I think it is, but not the way you planned. As the confrontation reached its peak, I decided it was time to show my full hand. Before anyone leaves, I announced, there are a few things everyone should know. Mrs. Davis's son brought out a tablet from his truck. On it, I displayed the security footage I'd been collecting for months. Crystal clear images showed Harrington and 2 others trespassing on my property at night, tampering with my irrigation system. Interesting hobby you have, Mr. Harrington, I commented as the footage played, especially for someone so concerned about community standards. Next, I played an audio recording from my phone, a conversation between Harrington and another developer discussing how they plan to squeeze out the remaining farmers to secure water rights for the golf course. I've been expecting this visit, I explained to the increasingly uncomfortable officers. Ever since I found Mr. Harrington's son-in-law, who I believe is you, officer, trespassing on my property last week. The lead officer's expression confirmed my suspicion. Harrington attempted to regain control. These recordings are illegal. You can't. Single-party consent state. Judge Thompson interrupted. If Mr. Miller was part of the conversation or on his own property, these recordings are perfectly admissible. I turned to the officers. You should also know that I filed a formal complaint with the State Attorney General's office regarding abuse of power and intimidation tactics. From my truck, I retrieved a thick folder of documents. This contains every interaction I've had with Mr. Harrington's HOA and development company. The fraudulent violation notices, the falsified environmental claims, the threatening phone calls. I handed a copy to Judge Thompson. I've also documented similar harassment of 5 other agricultural property owners in the county, all of whose land coincidentally appears in Meridian Development's expansion plans. Then came my final revelation. I produced the conservation easement papers, officially signed and notarized the previous week. As of last Tuesday, this property is under a permanent conservation easement, can never be developed regardless of who owns it. The water rights are permanently dedicated to agricultural use. Harrington looked like he might collapse. You can't do that. The development is going to need a new location. I finished for him. The younger officer finally spoke up. Sir, I wasn't informed about any of this. We were told this was a legitimate environmental inspection. Before Harrington could respond, the unmistakable sound of a sheriff's siren cut through the air. A county sheriff's vehicle, a real one, approached with lights flashing. Sheriff Bill Henderson stepped out, surveying the scene with experienced eyes. Interesting gathering, he remarked. City police vehicles outside their jurisdiction. Civilians impersonating county officials. He nodded toward me. You all right, Jim? Just having a disagreement about property rights, Bill, I replied calmly. The sheriff turned to the officers. Gentlemen, I'm going to need your badge numbers and an explanation for why you're operating outside your jurisdiction without notifying my office. The lead officer began stammering an explanation, but Henderson cut him off. Save it for the official investigation. The state police have been notified. He turned to Harrington. Mr. Harrington, I've received some very interesting information about your development activities from the Attorney General's office. They'd like to speak with you as well. Harrington's face went from pale to ashen. This is a misunderstanding. Several misunderstandings, it seems. Henderson agreed. We'll sort them all out downtown. As if on cue, a local news van pulled into my driveway. My niece's husband Tom, a reporter for the local station, stepped out with a cameraman. The trap I'd laid over months of patient planning had finally closed. The arrival of the sheriff and news crew completely changed the dynamic. The city officers, now facing scrutiny from legitimate law enforcement, quickly distanced themselves from Harrington. We were following orders from our captain, the lead officer explained to Sheriff Henderson. We were told this was a joint jurisdiction operation. Sheriff Henderson was unimpressed. And you didn't think to verify that with my office? Protocol exists for a reason, gentlemen. As the officers surrendered their badges and weapons pending investigation, Harrington made one last desperate attempt to salvage the situation. This is a targeted harassment campaign against legitimate business interests, he shouted, aware of the news camera recording his every word. Miller has been violating regulations for years. I remained calm. Which regulations would those be, Mr. Harrington? The ones you invented on HOA letterhead. Tom, the reporter, approached with his microphone. Mr. Harrington, can you comment on allegations that Meridian Development has been systematically pressuring agricultural landowners through fraudulent means? Harrington tried to push past him toward his vehicle, but Sheriff Henderson blocked his path. I'll need you to stay right here, sir. We have some questions about these documents. The sheriff held up a folder, one I recognized as containing the falsified inspection reports bearing forged county seals. Falsifying government documents is a felony offense, Henderson explained, as if teaching a civics class. So is conspiracy to commit fraud and abuse of power. The younger officer, looking increasingly distressed, approached the sheriff. Sir, I'd like to make a formal statement. I wasn't aware of the nature of this operation when I was assigned to it. By now, Mrs. Davis's live stream had attracted quite an audience. 3 more of my neighbors had arrived, along with 2 members of the county commission. One commissioner, Janet Weathers, looked particularly troubled as she surveyed the scene. She'd been a vocal supporter of Meridian's development projects. Jim, she said, approaching me carefully, I had no idea things had gone this far. The commission was told these were all voluntary property acquisitions. I nodded. Might be time to review those other development approvals, Janet. I doubt my experience is unique. Sheriff Henderson, only a few years older than me and someone I'd known since high school, was now reading Harrington his rights while the city officers stood by, their faces a mixture of embarrassment and concern for their careers. As Harrington was escorted to the sheriff's vehicle, he turned to glare at me one last time. You've made a powerful enemy, Miller, he hissed. I simply smiled. No, Mr. Harrington, I've exposed one. 1 month later, I sat in the county courthouse, watching the proceedings with quiet satisfaction. Harrington and 3 other Meridian executives faced multiple felony charges: conspiracy, fraud, falsifying government documents, and misuse of police authority. The investigation had uncovered a web of corruption extending through parts of the city government and police department. The lead officer, confirmed as Harrington's son-in-law, had accepted a plea deal in exchange for testimony about how the scheme had operated. 2 city council members had resigned rather than face ethics investigations. When called to testify, I wore the same clothes I worked in every day: worn jeans, flannel shirt, boots still carrying a hint of the morning's mud. Brought my dignity, not pretense. Mr. Miller, the prosecutor asked, Can you describe the pattern of harassment you experienced? Simply and clearly, I laid out the facts. The fraudulent violations, the tampering with my property, the escalating threats. My voice never rose, never showed anger, just the steady determination inherited from generations of millers who worked this land. The evidence spoke for itself. My meticulous documentation, the security footage, the recorded phone calls, the falsified documents on HOA letterhead designed to look like official county papers. Judge Ramirez, known for her impartiality, could barely contain her dismay as the evidence mounted. When the verdict came 2 weeks later, it was decisive. Guilty on all major counts. Harrington sentenced to 5 years. Heavy fines for Meridian Development. A complete investigation into all their projects. But the most satisfying moment came when Judge Ramirez ordered additional damages. In light of the deliberate and malicious nature of these actions against Mr. Miller and other agricultural landowners, this court awards triple damages to be paid to each affected party. The courtroom remained silent as she continued. Furthermore, the court orders Meridian Development to establish a $2 million fund for legal assistance to rural landowners facing similar pressure tactics. As we left the courthouse, reporters gathered around. Mr. Miller, how does it feel to have won against such powerful interests? One asked. I considered my answer carefully. This wasn't about winning. It was about standing your ground when you know you're right. My father taught me that some things aren't for sale at any price. Another reporter called out, "What will you do with the settlement money?" I allowed myself a small smile. Same thing I've done every day for 40 years. Tend my cattle. Work my land. Live honest. Then I added, though I might fix that north fence a little sooner than planned. The ripple of laughter felt like the first breath of fresh air after a long storm. 6 months after the courthouse victory, my property looked different, though not in the way Harrington had envisioned. Where he had planned water hazards for his golf course, I'd established the County Agricultural Heritage Center, funded partially by the settlement money and supported by the community. Every Saturday, farmers and ranchers from across the county gathered for a market on my east field. Families who'd been pressured to sell were now returning, reclaiming their agricultural roots. The younger officer who'd spoken up during the confrontation, now working for the county sheriff after the city force was reorganized, occasionally helped with the veterans farming program we'd established. Young men and women just back from overseas found peace working the land, just as I had after my time in Desert Storm. The conservation easement had been expanded to create a protected agricultural corridor, ensuring this way of life would continue for generations. Even some former HOA members had come around. Several now volunteered at the Heritage Center, gaining a new appreciation for the agricultural traditions they'd once viewed as obsolete. On a particularly beautiful spring morning, I stood watching a group of schoolchildren learning about cattle raising from Mrs. Davis. Despite her age, she'd become our most enthusiastic educator. I planted new saplings along the property line, trees that would take decades to reach their full height, trees I would never see in their maturity, but that someone would enjoy long after I was gone. Just like the land itself, some investments are meant for future generations. They came with badges and threats, thinking an old farmer would be an easy target. But this land isn't just soil and grass. It's my father's sacrifice, my children's birthright, and my sacred duty. When those officers surrounded me that day, what they couldn't see was generations of millers standing behind me. In life, there will always be those who mistake kindness for weakness and patience for surrender. Remember this: the most dangerous man isn't the one who fights with anger, but the one who stands with purpose. This land was, is, and always will be worth standing for.